Today, we're going to talk about some possible solutions to climate change. The goal of this video is to identify specific actions that humans can take to reduce carbon emissions and therefore reduce impact on climate. To understand what sorts of solutions might work, we have to be clear about which industries are contributing large amounts of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. Those will be the most strategic to target and make sure that we're finding ways to reduce the amount of carbon that those industries are emitting. So, what are the large-scale carbon producers? There are three primary ones I want you to know about. The burning of fossil fuels by power stations to generate electricity makes up about 40% of global carbon dioxide emissions. So power stations that generate electricity, they're a huge contributor, about 40% of global carbon emissions coming from them. Also, the transport industry. This would include semi-trucks. You can probably see lots and lots of semi-trucks driving on the highway delivering goods. But that's not just them. Airplanes, huge boats that transport goods. All of these are considered part of the transport industry. City buses, these would be part of the transport industry. And that industry as a whole contributes about 30% of global carbon dioxide emissions. So just between those two industries right there, you have almost 3/4 of global carbon emissions coming from them. One final one is manufacturers of cement and concrete. They contribute about 5 to 10% of global carbon dioxide emissions. So those three industries make up the huge bulk of large-scale carbon producers. Now, what can be done to reduce the amount of carbon dioxide emissions coming from these industries? Here are a few solutions. How can we reduce the human impact on climate? We need to reduce our level of greenhouse gas emissions. So those industries that I just described, they're emitting huge amounts of a greenhouse gas, carbon dioxide. We've got to find ways to reduce our level of greenhouse gas emissions. And this can be done by improving energy efficiency. So the sources of energy that we have, we got to find ways to make it more efficient to where we can get more energy for longer out of it than we are. Also, we need to increase our use of renewable energy sources. So in this first case, the first bullet point here, it's not necessarily that we're using renewable energy sources for this option. Instead, we're just trying to find ways to make the energy that we are using more efficient. Here, we're actually looking for renewable energy sources, a different source of energy in this case, one that's renewable. And I'm going to say more about that in just a moment. We can also use artificial carbon sequestration technologies, and I'll say more about that in a moment. We can also plant more trees. Why? Trees perform photosynthesis. They take in carbon dioxide. They capture carbon. By doing that, we would be taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere just by planting more trees. In addition, we can reduce deforestation. So don't cut down the trees that we have. They're taking carbon dioxide out. So if we reduce deforestation and we actually plant more trees, this can reduce the amount of greenhouse gas emissions. One final option we'll look at is a cap and trade system. So with the remaining video, I'm going to explain what renewable energy sources would be in this case, what artificial carbon sequestration is, and what a cap and trade system is. Okay, so first, examples of renewable energy sources. These would be solar energy, wind energy, and hydropower. There are other renewable energy sources, but these are the three I want you to know about. Solar energy harnesses energy from the sun. So you can see these are solar panels here. They absorb the energy from the sun, charge up some batteries, and then we can use that energy to power other things. There's also wind energy. These are a giant like windmill. These generate power from the wind. So the wind blows these and spins them, and that movement can actually charge up, say, a battery, or it can store energy. And again, we can use that for other purposes. And then hydropower. This, oh, I meant to say, generates power from water. I need to fix that. So it generates power from water. So this is a dam, and the dam, as the water moves through the dam, it can actually power the dam and generate electrical power. Okay, so solar energy, wind energy, and hydropower, all of these things are considered renewable energy sources. Now, a second strategy that I mentioned was artificial carbon sequestration. That's a fancy sounding word. What does that actually mean? That's just an engineered attempt. So this is like an engineering project here. An engineered attempt to capture and store carbon dioxide that's produced by human activity. So rather than, when I say engineered attempt, compare that with like photosynthesis. So plants are naturally sequestrating carbon. They're naturally capturing it and storing it, right? But here we're thinking of, is there a way that something besides the plants can capture and store that carbon? And here it would be basically a machine. And again, this carbon would be primarily produced by industrial processes and power generation. So in this image, you see dispersed CO2. This is all the CO2 that's in the atmosphere because of these industries that are pumping out CO2. What would happen is this carbon sequestration technology would capture that CO2 from the industrial sources before they get released. So before the carbon dioxide leaves and goes up into the atmosphere, it would actually be captured. And there's a machine to do this. The machine would capture that carbon dioxide, and then it would inject it and pump it down into geological formations like the ones you see in this picture. Here's a coal mine. Here's a depleted oil and gas reservoir. Here's a deep underground aquifer. So the machine would capture, store that carbon, inject it down into these geological formations that are underground. And this is where carbon naturally gets stored. Remember, coal and oil and these other fossil fuels, they're naturally a carbon sink. They naturally are places that store carbon. But as we have used those up and burned those, now these underground formations are empty. And so you can pump the carbon dioxide into them. One last potential solution here is to use a cap and trade system. Here's the idea. Each nation would be given a cap on carbon dioxide emissions. A cap meaning like the maximum amount of carbon dioxide emissions that you can have. And yeah, this is the most carbon dioxide that the country is allowed to emit. But if a nation needs to go over its cap, then it can trade goods or services or money with a nation that is below its cap. So this picture is meant to illustrate the idea. Say one nation on the right here has been producing a lot of carbon dioxide. They're above their cap. What they can do is trap that carbon using the type of technology that I just described on the previous slide, and they can ship that carbon off to another country who is under their cap. So you notice this bubble doesn't have it's not as full, so they don't have as many. This nation on the left doesn't have as much carbon dioxide emissions. And when that nation receives that carbon, they get something in return, like money or maybe some other type of goods. So this would be a cap and trade system. It's a way of balancing things out. You have some nations emitting a lot of carbon dioxide and some not emitting not as much. So taking advantage of that fact, and allowing nations that aren't using as much to benefit from that. To finish up, let's talk about some practical steps that you can do to reduce carbon emissions. For short distance travel, walk or ride a bike. No carbon dioxide is emitted besides the one that you're exhaling, and that's not going to be nearly as much as driving your car. For long distance travel, take a bus or carpool with others. Even though buses and cars do give off carbon dioxide, if you're able to transport more people per bus or per car, then that's fewer buses and cars on the road, which will reduce carbon dioxide emissions. You can also turn off electrical appliances when they're not in use. When you're not using a light in your house, turn the light switch off. Don't use that electricity. That's to generate that electricity. You have these power companies are burning fossil fuels, and just by not using as much energy, you can make it the case that they're not having to burn as many fossil fuels and pump as much CO2 into the atmosphere as a result. Now, I'd say this is a super common one for most of us. When I say turn electrical appliances off when they're not in use, this would include unplugging cell phones and chargers when they're not in use. So don't just leave that charger hooked into your outlet but nothing on the charge. Unplug it so that electricity is not being used. One final one, there are more, but one final one here is use LED light bulbs, or at least fluorescent light bulbs. The one on the right here is an LED light bulb. These are much better for not using as much electricity compared to incandescent light bulbs, which is what you see on the left. Okay, so those are some practical tips that you can use to reduce carbon emissions, and you are actually able to do these things all on your own.